Well, I am rather busy.
Now he's going to move like right along to McGregor. That's his whole life, you know.
Blah, blah, welcome to our episode on the X-Files. It's vampires.
We're in Pennsylvania this week. Yeah, so I think it's a little strange that the X-Files, the first popular mythology monster it decided to do was vampires.
I mean, it's done werewolves, sort of.
Oh, that's true. But I don't know that I would consider werewolves to be popular.
I don't know. When I think of like the, Universal monsters, like the back in the day horror films, Dracula, Wolfman, the creature from the Black Lagoon. I mean, I guess you could say the host was kind of their creature from the Black Lagoon story. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. And I guess we just have to wait for their mummy episode.
No, we saw Scully's mummy in the second episode. Oh.
Very well played, Richard. So I think that it's time to talk about the first this entire story about Scully, the X-Files being closed, and then Scully coming back, because we are now at the point where this is the first episode of the show. The X-Files were reopened last week. Now we have the X-Files being reopened. Mulder does not have a partner. He is off doing his X-Files thing again without Scully, and he is fundamentally lonely and being taken advantage of in a weird way. And I think that David Duchovny is doing interesting work. I think that Mulder's entire character arc here and his sort of emotional journey from the end of the first season to next week, or the next episode, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, is very interesting. Do you what do you think about that?
I mean, I have to say that I hated this episode.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like this episode, but I feel like I liked it a little more this time, only because I feel like I was watching it with a critical eye this time, so there was a little bit more to actually pick up on than I thought. But for the most part, I agree. It's not a standout episode of the X-Files.
I mean, to me, this felt like this is the episode that was filmed like they knew that at some point Gillian Anderson would go into labor, and this was that episode that they did, and they didn't really want to waste a good plot on an episode without her, and so it is kind of a crappy plot. And they don't do quite as much with Mulder being alone as maybe they could have, because it would be very interesting to have we have seen some of Mulder alone, Mulder not dealing with this, how badly Mulder is without Scully, but I don't feel like he's doing anything quite so unmoored in this episode. I don't feel like he goes as far into the darkness as maybe he could. I don't really buy that he's actually in any real danger of losing his soul in this episode. And I feel like if they're not they didn't want to go as far into the depths as they maybe could have. And so this does really feel like I'm waiting for Gillian Anderson to return to work so that way we can have the plot again. If they're not going to give me a good enough monster, this felt like one of those episodes where the monster of the week was cheesy and it didn't really have any meta plot stuff. And it felt like a missed opportunity to me.
I think I agree with you. I don't think that this is a strong episode of the X-Files, and I think just on a pure plot level,
yeah.
It is confusing as to what actually is going on and what happens.
Let me put it this way. I was not sure until the end how many vampire characters there were. And I still don't know if there is a larger world of vampires out there that's implied by this, or these were the only 4, or what. Was Kristen a real vampire or not? I couldn't really follow that part, and in a way, I don't know if the episode cared enough about its own machinations in that way. It was just a very half-assed heroin addiction metaphor, and I also read that apparently the actress playing Kristen dated David Duchovny at the time that they were doing this, so it just felt like an excuse for David. All right, well, if we're not going to have any real episode, my girlfriend and I are just going to hang out and we're going to do a throwaway vampire story. I mean, that's kind of how this episode came off to me.
I mean, I don't disagree with you. I don't really like this episode, but I do think that I don't know. It's weird to me that this episode makes so little sense because, okay, you're going to do vampires, fine, but you have to do something different and interesting with them. And essentially what they're saying is that vampires exist, I guess, and there are 3 vampires that are moving from town to town, murdering people and then disappearing. Okay, that's fine. I'll go along with that. That the standard vampire stuff about them being afraid of the sun and the sun murdering them, and then they can come back from that because they're magic. All right, fine. They don't have fangs. Okay. They live on blood, but they don't actually suck the blood out of you because how could you actually do that? Okay, fine. So they bite you and then use a syringe. All right, I'm all with you in that. Where the episode falls apart, like you said, is fundamentally, I do not know how many vampires there are. I think that the episode was trying to construct this mystery of who Kristen was without actually doing a really good job of actually making the mystery clear.
Yeah, is she a vampire? Is she just a fangirl? I don't know.
Well, I think my read on it, and I know it's always so fascinating to talk about like how I actually interpreted the plot of an episode, but I think it's so confusing that we have to. That from the end of the episode and from Kristen's a monologue to Mulder in the fabulous Hollywood Hills mansion, that essentially what happened is that she met that guy, the son, which I forget his name. I think she actually said it, but I don't know what it was, Jim or something. That they met somewhere and that she was infatuated with him and he was obsessed with her. And she is not a vampire. Kristen is not a vampire. She moved essentially to get away from this guy, and he was essentially a vampire stalker.
Okay.
But he also was in this weird vampire coven or whatever. So there were 3 vampires. There was the son, there was the other guy, that looked like that comedian, whatever his name is. And then there's another vampire that's a woman that looks a lot like Kristen that actually isn't Kristen.
The 2 actors look the same, the 2 actresses look the same, yeah.
Right. And the way that I read that is that at the end of the episode, Kristen says that line where she says, "Oh, well, I have tasted the blood of a believer, and so I will become a vampire," essentially. I mean, she doesn't say I will become a vampire, but she says, I will live again because I have tasted the blood of a believer. So Kristen was not a vampire. She's maybe fascinated with vampires or something. But at the end of the episode, she sets the house on fire to essentially get rid of the vampires, and essentially she thinks maybe she'll come back to life, but it doesn't seem likely that she will.
But there was also something like, "Oh, you can't kill us unless you're really a vampire," and she's like, "But I am a vampire now, ha ha ha."
Right, and so I think that's where she was going with that, is that she essentially made herself a vampire not because she wanted to live forever, but because she wanted to kill this guy because she found him so objectionable.
I can get behind that.
Right, but what are we supposed to do with that? The episode is fundamentally interested in that, but it's not clear as to what exactly is going on. And meanwhile, Mulder is acting very, very oddly in the entire episode.
Yeah, part of it is kind of funny because the 5th season of American Horror Story is in LA about vampires, very sexy locations, and it is an addiction metaphors, and it is this story but done well. And so that this episode looked even more crappy by comparison because of how unfocused it was. Like I said, it felt like a wasted opportunity. We're just marking time. We need to have a little time in between Scully disappearing and her coming back. So again, rather than give a good episode where Mulder, unmoored by the loss of his partner and best friend and the most stable force in his life, finds himself in a very dark place on a very dark case, and maybe going too far to solve it, maybe getting caught up in the mystery itself, maybe being seduced by the darkness or anything like that.
Well, because I agree with you. I think that in general, and then let's talk about Mulder now, because the way that Mulder's characterization has been going in the 2nd season, I find very subtle and I find very interesting, because essentially what you have is the first 4 episodes of the season were the X-Files closed, Scully off at Quantico teaching, and Mulder on the wiretapping, and then Skinner sends him on one adventure that is kind of an X-File that he's letting Mulder essentially get a bit under his belt again. And then so Mulder still has Scully to bounce ideas off of. He's calling her constantly. Scully is calling him. He's relying on her. They have a very strong connection. I think that what the entire first 8 episodes of this season make clear to me is that Mulder was probably very close to becoming unmoored before Scully was assigned to the X-Files. Scully has become a very, very stabilizing force in his life. They have a very, very strong connection. I mean, we will talk about One Breath because as terrible as 3 is, One Breath is like the exact opposite of it. And I think it's just an amazing episode for a lot of reasons. But
no, this was a fantastic week, just given the complete tonal, some of the worst and some of the best of the show in 1 week.
Exactly. And so essentially what happens is that, Scully disappears and then the X-Files get reopened. And so Mulder is now on the X-Files again. But it seems to me that in this episode, the X-Files have held no appeal for him anymore because he has essentially become unmoored. He has lost his sounding board. He has lost his partner. He has lost the person that grounds him in a real way, and he has no one to rely on. I mean, I don't think it's incidental in this episode that he is wandering around L.A., which is a very, very loaded place in American culture for a lot of different reasons. And L.A. at night is a very different place from L.A. in the daytime, right? There's very different implications there, as people that listen to this podcast, I'm sure, are aware of.
Yeah.
In the same way that if this episode was set in Duluth, Minnesota, it would not have had the same implications. There is a dark side to LA that everyone kind of knows about.
Yeah, well, there is. I mean, it's not insignificant that he mentions at one point he hasn't even gotten a hotel room. Like, he is that unmoored that he doesn't seem to have a place to stay.
Well, he says, I don't sleep anymore.
Yeah, and which is a funny thing to say in an episode about vampires, but what's striking me about this episode and a little bit in the next episode with his interactions towards Scully's sister, which I want to talk about, but Mulder is being very skeptical. I mean, when he immediately says when he first meets the son, oh, this guy's not really a vampire, he's just under a delusion. You're not really psychic, you can't talk to Scully, that's bupkis. This is stuff, ordinarily Mulder would jump at this and Scully would be the one who needs to pull him back and say, listen, are you sure he's really a vampire? It could just be a very severe case of porphyria, these symptoms, this and this and this. In a way, he is overcompensating for the lack of Scully in his life, and that's making things worse. Things become worse with the son because he doesn't seem to believe that he's actually a vampire and thinks that just the son will make him uncomfortable. If Mulder had full-heartedly believed this guy, he would have kept the windows covered just to be safe.
Right, and I wonder if, I don't know if the implication is that this is supposed to be the way Mulder was before Scully was on the X-Files. I don't know. I think that the implication, of course, is that he did not have a partner before Scully, or at least partners did not last very long. And so, to me, I look at this and I think, okay, well, he is obviously taking the Scully role. He is being a lot more skeptical, as you say. But of course, we've also seen him do that before. I mean, look at the episode Beyond the Sea, for example, where he did not believe that the serial killer was actually psychic, and Scully was the one who had this very profound experience with him. I mean, we have seen this kind of thing before from him. I think one of the things about the X-Files in general is that Mulder and Scully they're not one-dimensional characters. They don't always think the same way. And so in these 2 episodes, it is the case that Mulder is being very, very skeptical of both the vampire and Scully's sister, as you say. But I don't think that's out of character for him. Yeah, and I also think that him being sent, he doesn't get sent to LA. He goes there because he has an X-File on it. I just think he doesn't fundamentally believe that vampires are real. I mean, let's not forget that Mulder is the kind of person that's going to sit around his apartment on a Saturday night reading, 17th century accounts of vampires and saying, okay, well, this is actually porphyria or Gunter's disease or whatever. And now he's confronted with the reality that vampires are real, or at least kind of real. And I don't know. That's the problem with this episode, though, is that it doesn't really do anything with it. And it doesn't it doesn't tell us anything because we already knew Mulder was lonely. We've spent the previous 6 episodes of this season, and fundamentally speaking, the entire first season where Mulder slowly comes to trust Scully. He is very affected by the loss of his sister. He doesn't trust easily. We know all this already. So when he loses Scully, who he has come to grow to trust and even love, I think, as we see in One Breath, that he becomes skeptical and suspicious again, which is fine. But this episode in particular, doesn't really do anything with it.
Yeah, it maybe it had some good intentions, but for whatever reason, they didn't do a real episode for this time.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know though. I mean, there are moments of the episode that I think work, and I don't know. I mean, this was written by James Morgan and Glenn Wong, or Glenn Morgan and James Wong. I forget how that goes. And I think this was one of the last episodes of the show they wrote, which of course is not a great way for them to go out, but. I don't know. I guess I just don't know what fundamentally they were doing with this episode or what they were trying to say.
I mean, I almost, maybe even this was an episode that had initially been written with Scully in mind, and then they needed to write the episode without her, and why not use that one, and they stripped her out. Maybe there was a deeper part to the episode that is just lost in translation.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't see that. Yeah. I don't see that because I think this episode, it seems to me that this episode was designed around the idea that Mulder was going to be in this very dark place after Scully's disappearance. I mean, the episode starts out with him opening an X-file on Scully's disappearance and placing her glasses in the file. Yeah. Now, I don't know if that's really the way to treat evidence. I don't think it is, but whatever. It makes it's a nice visual statement. But, and also the office covered in plastic tarps and him uncovering it again. Okay, the X-files are reopened. But what does this mean? We don't know. And then we just get this mess of an episode that is supposed to be indicating that Mulder is very, very lonely and very, very depressed, but doesn't really do much with it. And I think, also part of it has to do with the fact that, we haven't really talked about the character of Kristen very much. I don't know that there's much to say about her. Partially, I think it's because the actress playing her is just not great at this. She's not really given any sort of internal life, and I don't really get a sense that, I mean, why is Mulder so attracted to her to begin with, and why is Mulder so obsessed with her? We never get an answer to that other than he needs to be for the episode to end.
No, they don't have and again, for people who were dating, their chemistry is only okay, right? Like it's just kind of there. They're hitting some very specific notes. They need to tell an addiction story. So we need to have the nice girl who, got into this world and can't get out. And, she could be saved, but unfortunately her demons get the best of her. And she found, that it's a very cliche addiction story that they're just hitting the right notes on. And
I don't know, though. I don't know that I agree with you that it's an addiction story. I think
they have syringes. They're in a club. They're talking about how, oh, have you ever tasted blood? It's wonderful in these rapturous tones. I mean, this seemed like it was junkie monologue number 47,
But I don't know that you're getting at the deeper. I mean, I guess I'm arguing for this episode now, but I don't know that you're getting at the deeper meaning of that, which is that it's not an addiction story. It's fundamentally a story about broken people that are lonely. And why do people take drugs?
Yeah.
Like we're sort of they take drugs because they're unhappy with their life. They're lonely. They're depressed. They're poor. Like whatever reason it is, people don't take drugs because their lives are going well, generally speaking. And so Kristen being in this vampire club or whatever, I don't think is an indication that she wants to be a vampire, that she's obsessed with vampires, or that she wants to drink blood or what the fuck ever. I just think that this is an affectation because she's lonely.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's somebody. It seems more about somebody who was lonely, had nothing, thought experimenting with vampirism would be the way out of that. It turned out not to be, but the damage has already been so done, and she is too far out to be saved from it.
Yeah, and then of course she murders herself at the end of the episode because, of course, if you're addicted to heroin, that's the only way to get out is to murder yourself.
Well, a lot of times, unfortunately.
I guess the last thing I want to talk about before we move on to One Breath is that, do you fundamentally understand why Mulder goes back to the house? I don't get it. I don't know what's going on here. I know I keep saying that I don't understand what's happening in this episode, and I don't. But is it just a case of, are we not watching this carefully enough, or is this actually a mess? I mean, I definitely think it's a mess. And
well, I'm going to put it this way. Throughout One Breath, I don't think I looked away once. And so it's during the episodes of during the host, I was on the edge of my seat that entire episode. It's not like I am incapable of paying attention to an episode, but
right.
That to me suggests that this episode didn't do enough to hook me. We only talk about the plots of these only so much, and I will admit, during some of the worst X-Files episodes, I have stopped paying attention to this is what happens next parts of the plot, in favor of looking at, more of the character stuff, more of why it's failing. And so
sure.
If I'm not getting why Mulder went back to the house, I think that's a failing of the episode, but it's one that didn't really at the same time, if I knew the reason he went back to the house at the end, I don't think it would make me say, oh, actually this was a really good episode.
Right. Because I mean, like, there's that thing about the bread filled with blood in the oven, and that means that she's trying to cleanse the house, and he lies.
Yeah. What was that?
Well, he lies to the police. He says she's not coming back, and he knows that the blood indicates that she is coming back because she's trying to cleanse the house or whatever. I don't know. It's all very. It just seems to me that the episode is designed to get Mulder to a certain place, and it's not taking into consideration the actual mechanics or desires that he would need to have to get there. And maybe part of it is just that Scully is not there, and we are used to Mulder explaining how he's thinking out loud. I don't know. Maybe the show just doesn't work when Scully's not there. I
think that's an excuse, because there are plenty of shows that have intricate plots without a Mulder and a Scully, and we are still able to understand why the characters are doing what they're doing.
Well, I mean,
I think there are other ways that he could have, made certain of his motivations clearer to the audience.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm not saying that the show could not do it, but maybe the writers are just too used to telling that type of story.
That's fair. Yeah, they just don't. It didn't seem like they knew how to tell a story that was just Mulder.
Right, and so what we get is this.
3, or as I like to call it, P.
I mean, even the name of the episode is like
and there were 4 vampires. That was the worst part. But there were 4 vampires. I know. It's. Please, can we move on to One Breath, because I'm really happy about that episode.
Okay, let's move on to One Breath. So why are you happy about One Breath?
Well, because it was really good.
Oh my God, this episode is just. I mean, fuck. Like, I would love. I mean, this is what I was talking about when I was saying that the second season of the X-Files is just elevating its game to such a large degree that I can't believe it's the same show sometimes. Like, the first season is fine. The first season has some good episodes. I think that, like you said before, Beyond the Sea was maybe the first glimmer of the other show that the X-Files was going to become. And now what you get is this deeply beautiful meditation on life and spirituality and what it means to die and what it means to love somebody. And then it's also mixed in with the whole meta plot of the mythology and the mystery of who the cigarette smoking man is and who this character X is, the new Deep Throat, and what exactly is going on with Skinner. And it's just
a dense episode. Again, these are 2 very meaty plots, just one on a plot level, one on a thematic level, and neither of them feel like they are encroaching on the other's screen time. Both of them feel like they are properly dealt with. Like, it's very economical in that way too. I guess where do we begin on this? I don't even know. I have trouble. I'm having trouble getting into the episode only because I don't know where to begin. I mean, it's so dense.
Well, let's talk about Scully's appearance then. So she was gone for one episode and now she's back, and of course she's not really back. She's in a coma for the vast majority of this episode until the very end when she wakes up and everything's fine. And next episode or the episode after that, she's going to be back in her trench coat with Mulder going off to Dubuque, Iowa, and they're going to be solving the mystery of the exploding head guy or something. So that's going to happen. The show's going to get back to some sort of normalcy after this 8-episode arc about Scully and Mulder being separated. Now, but the interesting thing is Scully is not in this episode really. She doesn't speak in this episode until the very end, but she is such an outsized presence in this episode.
Yeah. Well, because it's all of the scene because when she's not, because the entire plot is every single scene hinges around Scully being in a coma, and what are the ramifications of that? Both on the Mulder and the family side, it's dealing with, what are the ramifications of this person who we love, who is a shell, who has said that when she is at this point, she would prefer to be taken off of life support. What does that mean? What does it mean to let go of somebody that we love? What is all of that? And the Skinner and Mulder sequences are all dealing with, Scully is out of the picture in a way that is as a victim of this gigantic conspiracy that is going around and taking care of all of her lives. And what is our next move? And how do we deal with this? How do we counter this? What kind of sacrifices do we need to make morally in order to avenge the ones that we love who have been unfairly hurt by this?
Yeah. Well, I mean, maybe a good place to start then is to talk about, because in a way this is kind of a sequel or a spiritual sequel to Beyond the Sea.
Yeah.
And Beyond the Sea was a sort of deeply meditative episode that had a lot of implications for Scully's character as it was developing, and her family that was the first time we met her parents. In this episode, we see her mother again, I think for the third time. We meet her sister, who we have not seen before, Melissa, and the implication here is that they all know who Mulder is. That
he's practically one of the family at this point.
He is one of the family. I mean, there's that line at the end of the episode when they're about to take Scully off. Well, not at the end, but towards the end of the episode when they decide to honor the terms of Scully's living will and take her off life support, take her off the ventilator. And, Scully's mother says, this is a moment for the family, but you can join us if you want. And so that's a very interesting phrasing to me, because it indicates that if her mother doesn't consider Mulder family, her mother doesn't really know Mulder, doesn't really, not that she doesn't trust him, but she just doesn't know him, but she knows that Scully has this kind of deep, almost indescribable relationship with Mulder. It's not a romantic relationship. It's not a friendship. It's who knows what it is. And she realizes that she would want Mulder there.
Well, in a way, it's not really Mrs. Scully's place to say whether Mulder is a member of her family or not at that point. Dana Scully has made that decision, and it's her way of she puts it in this context of, you respect my daughter and I respect her too, and I respect her wishes. She wanted this for her living will. And by implication, she views you as as a member of the family. And so by the transitive property, I view you as a family member, even though we're not that close. You're in this with us. If you want to be a member of this family, the call is on you, not me, because that's what happened. Dana already made the Scully family vote on this situation.
Well, I think that's clear. From the moment it's revealed that Mulder is the witness to her living will. I mean, that is obviously usually the role of a family member. If you're going to have a living will, you're going to have your spouse or your mother or your father or your brother or someone witness it for you, not your coworker. Yeah. And I mean, it seems churlish to call the Scully-Mulder relationship a coworker relationship, but that is essentially what they are. I mean, that is how they know each other. That's how they operate in the vast majority of instances as colleagues that work together.
Although they are more partners than coworker, because they do have a very particular flavor of coworker relationship, I would say. Though that said, you're right. The super category is of coworkers.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think that there is I mean, obviously, I don't think that it's a surprise to anyone that law enforcement officers, the partner relationship is obviously going to be a little different from most coworker relationships.
Yeah.
I mean,
we've seen how many movies about that. Yeah.
My coworkers are not usually in life or death situations with me, so that's a difference there. But I want to say that for me, what is so fascinating about the ways in which Mulder has become part of Scully's family is that we still have not really seen any of Mulder's family. And aside from Samantha in flashback, we don't know, we've never met his mother. We've never met his father. I don't even think we know that he has any other siblings besides Samantha. I think the implication is that he does not, but
Whereas
know all
Scully
about
comes,
Yeah, well, Scully comes from a very strong family. She's got her two brothers and a sister.
a relatively large, family.
Yeah, they talk about. I think it's interesting that, just I mean, what does it mean that Mulder and Scully constantly refer to each other by their last names, even to the point that they don't want their family members referring to themselves by their first name? I mean, she has made it clear that Scully has told her, Dana has told her, not to call Mulder Fox.
Yeah. The sister that's if the sister is to be believed as being able to talk to Scully, at that moment, apparently Scully is letting her know not to call him Fox. And it's, especially with that reminder, it almost seems like whenever the mother calls him Fox, it's a slightly pointed use of the word, but
because I think that her mother calling Mulder Fox is an indication that she's saying, look, whatever relationship you have with my daughter is one thing. I'm going to have a different relationship with you, and so if I want to call you Fox, I'm going to fucking call you Fox.
It is also the kind of thing where that is almost a cliche, on TV where one character is always known by the nickname, but the main character's mother always refers to him by the full name, to characterize her. There is a little characterization of Scully's mother in that. On a side note, here's my fanon. Here's my little theory. The Scully women are mildly psychic. Obviously, Scully is able to commune with the spirit of her father in Beyond the Sea. Scully's mother, in the episode where Scully gets missing, has this dream about her being missing and seems to be feeling something when her daughter is actually taken. And now you have the sister who is very much claiming to have some psychic gifts and know that. So I think this is some of Mulder's arbitrary skepticism, but I think there is a very mild form of the gift within the Scully family.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I definitely think that's a possibility. I don't know that that's anything I've ever thought about before, but I like that idea, and I think it fits in with what we know about the characters.
Yeah, they're not going to be very strong. Maybe they really can only communicate with family members, but still.
Yeah. Well, I want to. There's a couple things there that I want to go into, which are kind of related to that, which is Scully's adventures in Dreamland. Yeah, in what land?
Coma Land.
Oh, Coma Land. Okay. I thought you said something else. And then
I wonder what.
I'll never say. And then also the story at the beginning of the episode about Scully's snake. And I always wonder about this because, the X-Files has this reputation for being a very sort of meditative show. And I think you're starting to see that. Yeah.
It is. There is, again, coming off of, I am seeing the Twin Peaks influence very strongly, but it's much faster paced than Twin Peaks is, but it does have a lot of moments of very dreamlikeness or very languid pacing, very broody, very melancholy and ambient. And I guess what I love about this story is at the beginning is this is such a cliche story, right? Somebody hunting for the first time and they shoot a deer and they see this beautiful creature die and then they realize but it's a snake. It's something that we're explicitly told that Dana was scared of as a girl. That nobody would, a garter snake, nobody finds majestic really, but that she is still weeping over this is a very strong statement about, this is a woman who would ultimately become a doctor, who would base her life around the preservation of life, who in Stretch, what side are you on? The victims. I mean, it doesn't matter that this is a snake. This is a victim of something that she did. And
yeah.
I really loved that they took this, again, what could be a very cliche version of a story and twisted in such a way that it becomes its very own beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that it also relates very nicely to Scully's struggle to stay alive, because in a sense the beginning of the episode establishes her strong, where maybe the roots of her strong protection of life instinct, the fact that she became a doctor, the fact that she so strongly believes in saving people and saving victims. I mean, also the fact that she's extremely competent, as we've talked about. I mean, she's graduated from medical school and also gone to the FBI Academy and is a practicing doctor. Well, not a practicing doctor, but she's a accredited doctor, and she also is an FBI agent. I mean, this is not something that I think happens very often.
And she's training other people too. So yeah, she has a very high
Yeah, but then of course in this episode she's the one whose life is being threatened by external forces that are beyond her control, and I think maybe I want to lead into moving into sort of the mythology storyline a little bit more, because it seems like it's separated, but it's really not. I mean, we get an indication here that, and I want to talk about Skinner as well because my God, but the implication here is that there are events going on that have really nothing to do with them, but at the same time, there is I don't know, it's almost the sense that Mulder and Scully are the pets or something of these people.
They're still rookies to all of them. How long has Cancer Man been conspiracizing? He's been he's got 40 years of this stuff under his belt. Mulder has maybe 10, and Scully only a year or two. Deeper Throat's, when he's saying that, Deeper Throat basically says if you want to be at this level, you need to be doing certain things, in this episode specifically killing another, that Mulder is not necessarily willing to do. So he is never going to be able to. So Mulder is finding difficulty crossing the threshold into the next level of the conspiracy, because in a way this conspiracy is by people who are so morally corrupt that you have to, I don't know, be a certain level of evil to ride this ride, right? I mean, they talk in this episode a lot, oh, you're becoming a player. Oh, they talked about this as a game in a way, and you need to have a certain level of risk to get on this, that Mulder is perhaps trying to be virtuous enough to not be. In other words, in order to stop this conspiracy, you need to have a certain amount of virtue and morality, but in order to learn about the conspiracy, you have to compromise all of those things, and he's really struggling with that.
I think that's right, because one of the things that I always come back to is the idea that when Mulder confronts Cancer Man, the cigarette smoking man, in his apartment, which I don't know, that seems to me to be a little bit of a front, because does he really live like that? But I mean, he spends his evenings watching old movies on television while drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. I mean, I guess maybe, but it doesn't seem likely.
Well, part of the I guess part of the implication is that, I mean, he does say, I'm doing this because it's what I think is right. And maybe it gives a different shade to the character, because what if this is what his life is? He's not doing this for glory. He's on a government employee's salary, probably a lower one just to keep up appearances, and therefore isn't getting a glamorous house. He doesn't have a ton of power. He has a little bit, which he'll admit to, and probably more than he's letting on, but at the same time, he is not the most powerful man in the world. He goes out on the street. He has no badge that he can flash. He has nobody recognizes him. Part of being so secretive is you don't have power on the street, and it gives a sense that, it gives a sense of things being so much less clear-cut. He's not doing this because he's evil and corrupt. He's doing this because he knows certain things that are that fucked up that they need to be protected.
But he is evil and corrupt. I mean,
well, yeah, that's the... again, you have to... he is causing us to ask the questions of how evil and corrupt can you get while still doing the right thing? And I think the show certainly believes that he has crossed that line.
Sure.
And certainly one of the reasons we are following Mulder is because he is a person who will not cross the line when push comes to shove. He's not going to kill the two hitmen waiting for him, even though, I mean, if you want to talk about a snake, I mean, the two people who are going to raid his apartment that he decides not to murder are not good people, and yet that is still crossing a line for Mulder.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that that's partially the point of the snake story in general, is that it's talking about the ability to murder with impunity without really having any sort of moral compunction about it or guilt. And there's this idea of the game, there's this idea of players, and a Deeper Throat X says that, he has no desire to die. He is not at Mulder's beck and call. Mulder is at his beck and call.
Yeah.
I think he calls him his piece to use or something like that. He is, he says like, you're my piece, you're my, on the board or whatever, something like that. And so there's always this sort of idea throughout the episode that Mulder is just a piece of a game. And what you need to do, of course, in a game is not get emotionally invested. You need to keep your eye on the end. You need to be able to play well and not get wrapped up in emotional responses to things. And that is definitely not how Mulder responds. I mean, the very beginning of the episode starts out with him screaming incoherently at the doctor. Where did Scully come from? Who brought her here? Why is she like this? And Mulder is a character that obviously wears his emotions on his sleeve a lot of the time. And so to me, I say, okay, well, Mulder's greatest strength and Mulder's greatest weakness is his connection to Scully. The fact of the matter is that he wants to protect her and that he is not able to write her off. And I think the reverse is true as well. The cigarette smoking man, he's going to murder people. X, he's going to murder people. Everyone there has probably murdered a bunch of people. They don't care that, X assassinates someone right in front of Mulder, shooting him in the head twice.
It's called Skinner calls it an execution. Yeah.
And so to me, I say, okay, well, they don't care. They'll murder whoever. They're not real people. They have to think that way because otherwise they're going to be consumed with the guilt of what they've been doing.
Yeah.
And perhaps, no, I was going to say, and perhaps what it really comes down to is that Mulder is going to be able to win the game because he is going to fundamentally change the way it's played.
Yeah. Well, he is going to stick to certain principles that the others are using it as justification. I mean, you do get the sense that cigarette smoking man says, well, this is evil, but what, my justice is more right than this in a way. It excuses this. They're looking for excuses, and really Mulder's the one who thinks the Prime Directive is inviolable.
Yeah.
And yet I think it's interesting I mean, the Mulder, you're my piece on the board from Deeper Throat is that at the very end, the conversation between Skinner and Mulder, when Skinner's talking about his experience in Vietnam and how he had a near death and just this, he killed a child soldier and it just completely fucked his entire worldview, as it would. And he basically says to Mulder, listen, you're able to go to these realms, the realms of the paranormal, the supernatural, and other, in ways that I can't.
Right.
And there is almost a tacit partnership. In other words, Deeper Throat can kill people without having a compunction against it. Skinner can navigate the bureaucracy openly. And Mulder is the one who can deal with aliens without going completely fucking insane by the thought. I mean, there is almost a sort of, we're all on the same side, and so maybe not using maybe they need to figure out how do we not use each other as tools, but realize, I mean, it would be very nice if these people would learn to trust each other enough to be a team, because they would be able to probably get a lot more done. There would be a lot less fighting.
Well, I think that's right, but to me,
but that's not this world. Yeah.
Well, what Skinner is an interesting character, obviously, because he is someone that he's not been on the show much. I mean, I think that this is his, fifth appearance, sixth appearance, something like that. He was a character that was established very late in the first season. He's a relatively new character.
Yeah, it's a season 2 character, largely.
And largely, yeah. And what they've been able to do with his character in these first 8 episodes of season 2 is just astounding to me. That he is an ally of Mulder's, even though Mulder didn't realize it, and that, to me, Skinner is someone who is very, very interested in bringing down cigarette smoking man. He's realizing exactly how fucked this conspiracy is, and that he is someone who trusts Mulder, who believes in Mulder, who thinks Mulder is a good agent, but does not believe in coddling Mulder. And Mulder is the type of person that wears his heart on his sleeve. He's yelling at people all the time. He's going off half-cocked. He's doing everything that Mulder does, that we've seen in the first season and a half or so of the show that we've watched. Whereas, and so to him, Skinner seems to be someone who's a company man, who doesn't trust him, who is involved in this conspiracy. He sees the cigarette smoking man and Mulder together all the time. But what we've seen, especially from the moments that we have seen Skinner by himself or with the cigarette smoking man without Mulder there, is that he does not like this guy. He does not trust this guy. He has reopened the X-Files. He is working. He gave Mulder his address, right?
I mean, there's the really nice moment with the "thank you for not smoking" sign, and that little pissing contest between the two of them was great. Yeah,
it was fantastic, and it's basically no words. That it is the case where I think Mulder is slowly starting to realize exactly how strong of an ally he has in Skinner, and that there are other ways to go about uncovering this conspiracy that do not involve ranting and raving like the newscaster and network.
Yeah, in a way, Skinner's kind of teaching Mulder how to be an adult.
I think so, and I think that it will be interesting to see what the Mulder and Scully dynamic is now that she is back. Is it going to change? Has Mulder been changed by his experiences without Scully? Has Scully been changed by her near-death experience? Those are going to be open questions that I think are going to be very interesting to see the answers to as season 2 and beyond goes forward. Yeah,
again, especially as I am partially watching this to see how these storytelling techniques were used in earlier form. This show made in the mid to late 2000s would have had very definite character changes, and these are big enough events that they are not going to be unaffected by them. So it will be very nice to see how are they handling the character changes that are going to happen from these gigantic events.
Yeah. Now, speaking of character changes, or perhaps not, lone gunmen appear in this episode again.
Yeah, I liked them a little better.
I think that this is Frohickey showing up in that ridiculous suit with flowers for Scully is the moment that I think the lone gunmen start to come into focus.
Well, I also really liked the moment when they're talking about this disease, and they start off in total nerd mode. Well, it says this and this, and then Mulder's asking, well, is she going to be okay from it? And then they stop, and then they kind of almost realizing they're talking about somebody they know and like. I mean, it's not incidental that a lot of people in this episode talk about how much they like Scully. Both Skinner and the cigarette man say they like her. I don't think that's, she does almost seem to be the person that, she is this closest this episode has to an innocent hurt by this conspiracy in a way.
To some degree, yes. I mean, she was not. Everyone that's involved, for the most part, has asked to be involved in it.
Yeah.
Scully did not. I mean, Scully was assigned to the X-Files, not of her own volition. She chose to stay, of course, and she chose to help Mulder in the first 6 episodes of this season while teaching at Quantico, because they had this relationship that had developed over the previous season. And so she is someone who obviously has become invested in this, but she is not someone who asked to be a part of this. And I think that there is a desire on everyone's part to see her come through this okay, because they really, really respect her. They really like her. And it is the case, I think, as well, that the lone gunmen are, I mean, Frohickey in particular, yes, he thinks Scully is hot or whatever, and he's showing up to pay his respects to her. But it is the case where I think you're starting to see that the lone gunmen have more of a internal life, and they're not just like a one-off joke thing about the show that is going to get developed in further episodes, and I think in a very interesting way.
Yeah, I think again, the first time, yes, they were intended to just be a one shot. Oh, hey, there's further we can go with this. The second, they don't really have quite the tone yet, and it's more just is it good when we bring these people back? Yes, okay. Third time, now we're starting to get into who these people are.
Yeah. And I think the last thing to talk about maybe, or one other thing to talk about, we would be remiss if we did not discuss, and I don't know that there's a lot to say about it, but Nurse Owen, like some kind of spirit that is guiding Scully back to reality. I mean,
her guardian angel. I
kind of sold Richard on doing the X-Files because it is a commitment and it is a long show. I mean, it's 10 seasons, soon to be 11 plus 2 movies. That it's a very Catholic show, and I think that in this episode particularly, I think you are starting to see that a little bit. I mean, guardian angels are perhaps not exactly a Catholic thing, but it is the case that it's a very spiritual show, and it is very respectful, I think, of religious belief in a way that is uncommon for a lot of science fiction. And the idea of Scully having a guardian angel is just interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much, this episode isn't so much about religion as it is a kind of spiritualism. I mean, we're not dealing with matters of theology or dogma, but there is the implication that there is, I mean, why not? We've got vampires, we've got aliens, we've got human-sized leeches, we've got brains that can control mentally disabled people psychically. Why not there being a benevolent presence outside that is looking out for and loving and caring for the characters, and that every so often, the supernatural can be a good thing and can be a positive thing. I think that is a very nice statement to make.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that it's just nice that this episode has so many different layers and that there are so many different things going on, and that Scully's journey here as well, because we really haven't even talked about Scully's journey and sort of what is going on with her. I mean, obviously it's this idea about her soul or her spirit being pulled into the afterlife or not. Yeah. And that scene with her father, which is kind of indicative of the idea that, okay, she's not ready to go yet and that she is not ready to move on. She still has work to do and relationships to engage with in the world, that she's not ready to die.
I mean, they do leave it. It is ambiguous enough that it could just be these are all fever dreams that Scully is having. She is just imagining in Nurse Owens because once she was sick as a kid and there was this woman there, and that's simply all it is. She could just be thinking of what her father would say to her. After all, at the end of Beyond the Sea, she did say, I didn't need to talk to the psychic serial killer to know what my dad thought of me. He was my dad. I knew. This is what he says to her is along those lines, is stuff that she knew her dad felt because he was her dad. It could just be as simple as that, or it could be this moment of her communing with something greater and different than herself, and which is bringing her back. And the episode and the show's focus on faith suggests that the answer is whatever Scully chooses to believe that it is going to be, really. That's really what matters at the end. She had this experience. She can either view it as, coma stuff, or she can view it as a mystical experience that was genuine.
Yeah. And I think it's nice, and I think it's smart that the show leaves it at that and leaves it as a mystery and it's not solved.
Yeah, well. I don't think we're going to see Nurse Owens reappear, but...
No, I don't think so either. Well, maybe the last thing to talk about or mention before we wrap this episode up, because we would be remiss if we did not also mention the fact that apparently Mulder puts a period after his name. Like, what? Who does that? Well, when he writes his resignation letter, he's got Fox Mulder period typed in there, and then when he signs his name, he also puts a period after it. So apparently, Fox Mulder is not his name; it's Fox Mulder.
Wait, well, maybe it's like short for Fox Mulderowski or something like that. He's abbreviating it.
Yeah, Fox Mulderama. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I just thought it was a strange thing. I've never seen that before, and I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? Like,
well, the good thing about the X-Files is that every week, on a good week, you will see something very strange. That what does this mean? What is this? So this week we saw Mulder ending his name with a period. So
wow,
paranormal activity, missing, aliens found, and weird grammatical orthography.
How you feeling about the X-Files? Are you?
I'm having a great time. I mean, 3 I was not having a great time with. I don't think I even really enjoyed 3 as a, it's Friday night. This is a silly, thing. Yeah. But they can't all be zingers, and I am feeling much better in season 2 than I was in season 1.
Yeah, I mean, at some point we'll have to talk about, if you think the X-Files is doing fundamentally different things, especially in an episode like One Breath than it was in the first season. But this is maybe not that time because we've been talking about this episode for a long time already. But I just think that to me, this is what I mean when I say that the X-Files is just a wonderful television show, and it can do things like this that still over 20 years later just leave me breathless. I mean, not to make a pun, but it's such a beautiful episode of television, and it's so well done, and it's just so grounded in really, really, really strong character work that the show has been doing, that I'm always blown away by this episode. I just think it's one of the finest episodes of the show, and obviously there's a lot more to come. The show becomes even more experimental than this, but it's willing to go different places and willing to do different things and willing to blow up its premise and then come back to reality in a way that I think even television shows now have become not able to do and not willing to do.
I mean, this in a lot of ways, this episode reminded me for some reason of The Body from Buffy.
Yeah, sure.
Which is, and again, it's taking a very, it's taking a mundane scenario, the death or the coma of a family member, of a loved one, the possible loss, putting it into the science fiction or the supernatural elements are very light in both episodes. This is not so much about the, this is aliens are the window dressing for the, for these questions about faith and how far do you go to and all of those things. And I mean, that is part of the reason it does feel very relevant still, because even though aliens as a concept was a trend from the 90s, aliens is a metaphor for all of these things which still do exist, still will always exist.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And I am very jealous of the cigarette smoking man, though.
Why?
Because he's seen presidents die.
Maybe we will. Who knows? All right, well, I think we'll leave this episode of Tuning In there. If you have any thoughts on either of these episodes, 3 or One Breath, please leave a comment on the post for this episode of the podcast at tuninginshow.com. You can check out our Patreon, patreon.com/truckaboutshow, if you would like to support our podcasting endeavors financially. It also supports our other podcast, Truck About. This week, we did release an episode on the Star Trek Voyager episodes, Maneuvers and Resistance. We are well into the second season, and those podcasts are coming along very nicely, so please go to truckaboutshow.com and check those out as well. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, we are in all those places. Tuning In Show is our username in all those places. And as always, please leave us an iTunes review for tuning in. It is the best way for new people to find the show, and it makes my dog Hank feel great. Next week, we are back to normal with the X-Files. Scully is back. Yay. The X-Files are reopened, and we are going to be delving into Firewalker and Red Museum.
The Mac? Why do you...